Welcome to the PIDE webinar. Folks, today we have a special treat. Let me begin by saying my name is Nadeem and we are at the Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. And we are getting on to our daily webinar, or regular webinar, I should say. Welcome, Professor Mary Mellor. I'm deeply grateful to Mary Mellor for taking our time to talk to us. As you know, we seek out the best academics we can to bring them to Pakistan. Zoom has democratized the space for us, so we can get all the best people to come and speak to us. You will recall that for the last 40 years, we've been trying to bring them physically to Pakistan. And now technology is helping us to get these ideas to you. So I urge you to listen carefully and frame your questions, and Mary will take some questions. But before I go any further, let me say, Mary Mellor is a professor in Northumbria. She's a well-known author of many books, but the recent book on money and development, the money and debt, has created somewhat of a stir. So we thought we should listen to her. She's also the chair of a special initiative in her university, which is Sustainable Cities. At some point, inshallah, we'll try and get her to talk about that too. But today we'll just discuss debt and money. And with that, I'll go over to Mary. Mary, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
My talk is about the development and the democratization of money. As my next slide shows, there are two alternative views of money. In the general literature, money is seen as a useful economic instrument, but a neutral and useful, not important in its own right, versus the idea of money as an active economic agent that constructs economies. Naturally, I take the second view. I think that money has been underrated, and its role, its potential role in achieving social change, as presumably an Institute of Development Economics wants to achieve change. As my next slide shows, I'm linking the position of money as a power structure in society with a condition where money is not the most important power structure. Doesn't mean to say that money is not there. Money is present in all societies, but it's not an organizing principle. So my vertical axis is between where money is a structure of power in its own right, to where other structures are more important than money, and money just becomes a useful instrument. I also make a distinction on the horizontal dimension of between public power and private power. And as you can see, that breaks us into four boxes, as it were. The bottom left-hand corner is economic domination, where you don't have money power as the main mechanism, and power is really in private hands. But above that, we have a situation where there is private power, but money is the organizing principle, and that is the market. Moving to the other side of the table, where you have public power organized by money, you have what I've called sovereign taxation, a public money principle. And the bottom box, which is the box I would hope we could eventually get to, where you have public power, but it is democratically structured, and money isn't the driving force, it's just an enabler, a servant, not a master, as is often said. And I call that economic democracy. So I'm going to explore all these boxes in turn. So in my next slide, I take that bottom corner box. I presume if we're interested in development, we're aiming to get to somewhere out of that bottom corner box, the economic domination through direct exercise of power. This goes from the relatively benign domestic and subsistence labor, which of course can be more naked power than that, but feudal command over labor and resources, to the more brutal forms, slavery, including debt slavery, imperialism and colonization, race, caste, ethnic and gender hierarchies, and finally, banditry, warlordism, drug cartels, mafia. I presume that if you're doing a development process, there is some aspect of that is one of those categories is the main sort of form of power. I stress that this is where the power is private. It's not a structural power. It's not an organization, a politically organized power. The point about this no money not organizing the system and private powers, it is the naked power that certain individuals have, or groups and individuals have, over other groups and individuals. So the aim, I presume, of economic development is to get out of that box, as it were, and into one of the others. Is it developing the market? Is it developing the state? Or hopefully, is it looking for a building of some kind of economic democracy? In my next slide, I look at the box above economic domination. That is the market, where you have private power, but through control of a money organized system. Therefore, in this model, economic power is located in the market sector, and the search for profit in money terms drives the economy. We're very familiar with the market economy. But there is a power element, the ownership and control of money. Having money, investing money, borrowing money, justifies control of wage, labour, resources and consumption. The rich are considered to have the best use, to make the best use of resources. They're justified in whatever consumption pattern they want. They're justified in hiring wage labour and the usual critique of the market system. But when you come to the money element of the market sector, it's banking and borrowing that are key elements of the money system. I see this, as I describe in the next slide, as the banking circuit. The bank money circuit is, as would be obvious, lending by banks, and those loans are repaid with interest. At least they are, where you have symptoms that a system that allows interest. There are obviously Islamic banking has a different model, but this model is the loan repayment with interest model. And as you can see, the bottom arrow is bigger. This is because whatever the bank lends in commercial loans obviously has to be repaid with interest. Therefore, the bank, if it's the commercial bank, and has to become profitable, then it has to gain more money in than it lends out. So it is a constant. There's a constant circuit between bank lending and loans. Now, the next slide shows that there is a banking myth, which is very common in the models of the market economy, that when banks in a market sector lend money, they are merely acting as a mediator between savers and borrowers. That is their neutral instruments. They collect in the deposits from people as they bring their money to the bank for safety or for transfer or for savings or whatever. And these deposits enable the bank to make loans. The only problem with that model of where banks get their money from is it doesn't answer the question, where do the deposits come from? Where do people get the money to make the deposits in the first case that allow the banks to lend money? So as the next slide shows, the contemporary thinking, which is now shared by a lot of the main banking organizations, particularly the IMF or like the Bank of England quoted here, or the Fed or the US Fed, they realize that the money for the deposit in the banks comes from the banks themselves. That is, there's no other source of money other than of an increase in the money supply. I mean, obviously money circulates and goes from hand to hand, but the creation of money, as the Bank of England Quarterly Bulletin acknowledged, as late as 2014, it is very recent that the banks have accepted this model of theory of where the banks get the money from. The quote says, "The majority of money in the modern economy is created by commercial banks making loans." And this is the key. Rather than banks receiving deposits and then lending them out, bank lending creates the deposits. Now, this takes that model of the circuit that I showed you one question further on, because sorry, I lost my thread there. So the next slide shows the myths of money that lie behind our understanding of how money works within a market system. And if you look at most economics textbooks, the implication is that money was invented by the market to overcome the limitation of barter exchange. This is the classic story that you had the baker, the tailor, the butcher, and they directly swap through barter. This is a theory. They originally swapped through barter, but this is very inconvenient because the butcher didn't want what the hat maker had, and the hat maker didn't have what the tailor had. So money was invented by the market to overcome this problem and to put a universal equivalent, as it's sometimes called, a medium between which all other exchanges can take place. The link to the other myth of this is that the original and ideal money, therefore, was the commodity that was chosen by the market. And this is the commodity with intrinsic value, that is precious metal, gold, silver. Now, the problem with these myths of money is that, first of all, there's no evidence of historical barter exchange in any volume. I mean, there might have been individual barters here and there, but the idea of an economy organized on a barter principle just never existed. And therefore the idea that although there was certainly precious metal money, gold and silver, that has been invented on several occasions and brought into circulation, it's not by any means the only form of money. In fact, there's many forms of money all over through history, all over the world. And countries, for instance, like China, a major country through history, has never been fixated on gold and silver, and incidentally had paper money long before most other societies had really got going at all. But the existence of these myths that money is invented by the market and belongs to the market and should ideally be gold and silver means that despite its, as these purists would see, its degraded nature in modern societies, it's made of base metal coin, made of notes or plastic or even computer codes. It's insisting, the model of the market system insists that modern money, like precious metal, is seen as being in short supply. And this is a key to the paralysis of more radical thinking on economics, because what is seen as limiting what happens is that it's always prevented by the query, well, where's the money to come from? Who's going to pay? So as the next slide shows, we get to a point where neoliberalism, which is the dominant kind of Western model of the market system, sets up states versus markets. Public spending is seen there as only, since the source of all money is the market. Then when it comes to the public sector, public spending, the right-hand side of the original diagram I put up, any public spending is seen as financed by taking money from the taxpayer. And the taxpayer is assumed to be part of the private sector. It seemed to be hard-pressed private sector taxpayers who were seen as the wealth creators. And therefore, the myths of money being belonging to the market and being generated by the market justifies these proposals that every time you put a request for radical development, social change, sharing of systems, more equal societies, or more development, you will be told, well, where's the money to come from? There's no magic money tree. The assumption is, therefore, that the state, and this model is this very remarkably throughout the Western market economies, the neoliberal, what I call handbag economics, has an analogy of the state as a dependent household. The state must live within its means, it must pay its way, it mustn't get into debt, it must cover all costs, it mustn't borrow. So the state is treated, the public economy, the public sector, is treated as a dependent and rather like a sort of greedy child who needs to be disciplined. So that model is very strong, and it happens, and it stymies most proposals for social change and social improvement, because always the thing they will say is, where's the money to come from? And nobody's got the answer to that. Nobody's got the answer, not within conventional models of the economy anyway. So as the next slide shows, we're in a catch-22. If the state is assumed to be on public expenditure, or whatever the expenditure you want to make is dependent on market funding, this leads to the problem that all public spending is funded by the private sector, any increase in public spending must require increased taxation, and that the taxation is assumed to be on this private hard-pressed taxpayer, taking money out of the pockets of the hard struggling people just managing to keep their head above water. To enable the market to create more taxable wealth, therefore, it must have low taxes. The tax must be kept low, because otherwise increased taxation will cramp the market, and the market therefore cannot create taxable wealth. Therefore, the catch for the public economy is the states can't increase taxes to fund more public spending without undermining the ability of the market to create that money to fund that spending. So it needs, if the market model is right, the public economy needs the market economy, but it can't tax it, or at least not in any volume, because otherwise it will inhibit the tax from being the creator of wealth. Now, the next slide shows, there is a problem with this model. There is a conceptual problem, there's an empirical problem, but there's a political problem with the model that all wealth comes from the market, and particularly, and where the market gets its money is from is at its most simple. It's bank lending. It's the bank creating new money, and that new money being brought into circulation. Like if you look in the analysis I did of the growth between the 1970s up to the dot-com boom in 2000 in, say, Britain, was almost all the growth in the economy was more or less mirrored by all the money taken out as mortgage lending. So the direct borrowing, the wealth that led to the boom and then the subsequent collapse was based on mortgages. And we know it even got worse up until the 2007-8 crash, where mortgage lending was a very important factor in the boom and the slump. So therefore, if you argue that all money comes from the market system, and that therefore, if the market system, all the money in the market system comes from bank lending, the increase in the money supply, the money supply will collapse if people, businesses, institutions, governments, who are asked to borrow off the market sector, can take no more debt, or banks do not see loans as viable. So if you've got a money supply based on it was thought that the financial sector couldn't bring down the or at least it wasn't envisaged when the banking crash happened in 2007-8, that a financial institution like Lehman Brothers collapsing would affect the ATMs, the money access in the high street. It was the shock and horror when they realised that the ATM machines, the money issue machines, would dry up in about half an hour because obviously there's not that much physical money in circulation anymore. It's all held in bank accounts. So it's very clearly saw in 2007-8 that the money supply coming through the bank system, the financial sector could therefore, the link was such that the financial sector could bring down the money supply, and it did. It collapsed, and then and the state had to step in, which I'll come back to. But the other problem with the debt-based money system is that it's socially very regressive because it's socially divisive. Banks only lend to those deemed creditworthy. That is, the people who already have wealth or access to wealth. And this leads to financial exclusion of the poor. And because the wealthy can use the bank lending, as we can see in Western financial sectors, and the fact that the financial sector has boomed during this collapse, this pandemic, when the physical economy, the goods and services economy has collapsed, the rich and the billionaires are sailing away, literally sailing into outer space, because the wealthy can use bank lending to enhance their wealth. They can borrow to avoid tax. They can leverage buyouts of other firms. They can borrow money to speculate, as well as borrowing for mortgages and other more less extreme ways of using it. So the debt, if you want to have your money supply based upon the market system, then it will be based upon ultimately upon debt, the borrowing of new money into circulation, and that supply is crisis-ridden. It is bound to boom and slump. It is unequal. It is unfair. It makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. So if you show the next slide, I'll come back to my model I had before here. If you're developing an economy and using money or thinking about money in terms of development, I'm not saying it's the only factor in development by any means. I mean, there's lots more factors, but my focus is money. Then if you want to come out of a situation which is not organized formally by money and not based upon private power, you want to get out of this box I've called economic domination, you've got a choice really. Do you want to move in to enhance market forces, in which case you want to develop a commercial banking system? And I've just pointed out the problems with that it has its dynamism, it has its place. I'm not saying abolish markets, but a money system based upon the market is, first of all, as I've tried to show, is based on myths. And it's also very, very economically, socially, ecologically, politically unstable. It can collapse. So let's then move over to the other side of the diagram and look at this instance of sovereign taxation. Let's look at the link between moving from economic domination or the market to sovereign taxation. That is a money system that is administered through the public sector, through public power, particularly the power to tax, the sovereign power to tax, which I've already suggested to you, puts the market system in the link between the sovereign sector and the market sector in a catch-22. The state can't tax the market because the market then can't provide the wealth for the state. So can the state provide the wealth for itself? That's the next question. So if you go to the next slide, we can talk about the sovereign money power, the power of the sovereign here being whoever is the ruler. whoever represents the public structure. So if we look at the sovereign money in modern money systems, one thing we've learned from the 2007-8 crash and the pandemic is that modern money systems are ultimately a public responsibility. State monetary authorities step in when the privatized debt-based money supply fails or there are crises. Now, when we've seen that the state has stepped in, the public economy has stepped in with the progress known as quantitative easing, and also increase in state spending directly. So the quantitative easing is interfering and trying to trigger more investment in the financial sector, and state spending is trying to get more money in people's pockets and circulation, as in the pandemic. Now, where does the state get its money from? Now, the model we've put previously, the market model, it says, well, it gets it from the market. But as I've shown, that's not true, and it's problematic. So it's the acknowledgement is, and it's generally being gradually seen as more plausible, is that the state rescue is based on the public alternative source of money. That is it's acknowledged that the sovereign power structure in a money structured system. We're not talking about raw power here. We're not talking about the bottom left-hand corner of economic domination. We're talking about legitimate governments that have the public. They have a public constitution that enables the state, that gives legitimacy to a state-centered money system. And then within this, there is the sovereign ability of the state to create money, like the banks can create the money, but this time free of debt. As the next slide shows, there is the public money circuit. This is where the circuit of money comes from the state and is put into circulation through public spending of a variety of things. This can be welfare states, but certainly war states, armaments, building roads to nowhere. It is, the broad brush of public spending, and the income to the state, the return of that circuit of money via taxation and other public incomes. Now, you might notice that the size of the arrows is different from the bank money circuit, because for most countries, most of the time, public expenditure exceeds tax income. That is, there is a deficit. The rules of the European Union, for instance, says that the deficit of 3% is acceptable and expected. That it shouldn't go above 3%. But the idea that there's 3% the public can spend more than it gets in taxation, in itself must mean that 3% comes from the state in some way, if it's not coming back in taxation of the public income. Now, the next slide, as I argue in the next slide, the public money system, the state spending, as I've shown in that diagram, state spending, like bank lending, is in a constant flow. And this is where the deciding what is driving a money system becomes difficult. Because if you think about the bank statement, the bank's circulation I showed, it could look as if deposits were driving, deposits returning to the bank were driving loans, or it could see loans were driving deposits. And it's the same with public spending. It can be said that the state is the dynamic behind pushing the money around the system, or taxation is the dynamic pushing the money around the system. So therefore, it is understandable that different theories of models and circulations of public money and bank money, because it's in a constant flow and it's constantly expanding and contracting the money supply, it's a fluid system. And therefore, where you break into that fluid system and say this aspect of it is causing is the most important element. It makes it more difficult to say. But from the model of the debt-free, the public expenditure model, it would argue that the public sector's expenditure doesn't come from taxation and borrowing from the market sector. What it is doing is retrieving the money the state has already spent. And what that means is, what I'm trying to argue there is, public spending if public spending were based upon taxation, then it would have to wait to collect the taxes in. It would have no money until the taxes came in. And it would have to build up a kind of tax-funded piggy bank, a sort of store of money, which it could then spend on public items, be they armaments or be they money for the poor and housing, etc. But everybody acknowledges that, in fact, when the public spends, it doesn't spend on an assumption that it knows how much it gets in. It spends on a budget where it aims to spend so much, aims to get so much in tax. But this is totally unpredictable, and therefore you can never balance the books in advance. You can only see after all the money's been spent whether there is a deficit or not. Therefore, balancing the books is always post hoc, it's always after the event. And what is never put, I hardly ever see this put into the model of money and the circulation of money and public spending, is this public expenditure itself, if it is created by debt-free money issued by the state, is also a source of tax and wealth, which just in the English language, to stress the idea of the welfare state, I spell it wealth, W-E-L-L-T-H, just because it works in the English language. That wealth becomes well-being, as it were. But the public sector pays its taxes. It counts in GDP. So why do we treat it as a liability of the market sector when it contributes to GDP like the market sector? I've never understood why. Well, I do understand why, because the theory of market sector is that all wealth and all money comes from the market. Therefore, anything the state does is a burden on the market. But if you see the state as having the ability to create money in its own right, as opposed to having to borrow it through the banking system, then that explains where the additional money comes from, and the public spending becomes a source of tax, a source of GDP, a source of wealth and well-being. So that is the model. The next, as I argue in the next slide, we can take. There is a lot of theory in the textbooks about the market economy. Not too much about money in the market economy. That's taken for granted. But there's a lot of theories about the origins of markets and barter systems and gold and silver and all this sort of assumption about the superiority of markets being the most efficient form of economy you could ever have. If we set up an alternative model of sovereign money, then that doesn't see money as being determined by the market. It sees the public organization via money as state authority over the money system. And as is generally accepted, but not really theorized as to the implications of it, that most states, it's understood, most states issue and control the public currency. They print the banknotes, they mint the coins. And I would argue they set up the bank balances and other forms of modern money. The power behind the sovereign power of the state, the legitimized power of the state, is to command resources. So it's not economic domination, it's money domination. It's not, there are states who, obviously many states who terrorize and exploit their populations. But the ones the states I'm talking about is where the taxation system is accepted and operates well enough so that the state can command resources and labour through legitimised access to people's labour and resources, and to be exercised through the taxation system. Now, what is important is in the balance between the history of markets and sovereign state systems, is that the history of money is basically a history of states, because markets are comparatively recent. The invention of the gold and silver coin was about 600 BCE. It was used by Alexander the Great in 300 BCE to pay his mercenaries to fight his campaigns and his imperial exercises. It's huge amounts of silver coin he used to pay mercenaries to launch his imperial ambitions. And the history of money has been really a history of states, of different models of governance. Usually, obviously, in most of history, autocratic sovereign authorities, monarchies, empires, theocracies. So the history of money, and the history of gold and silver particularly, is a history of empires, a history of states, it's a history of powerful monetary authorities. And even to this day, it's accepted that it's banks, central banks who have the stores of whatever gold and silver countries still have. So there's a kind of mishmatch in the theory of modern economies and relation to money. That the role of the state is sidelined, and yet it's massive, and yes, it's acknowledged that the state is the creator of the public currency and guardian of the public wealth when it's gold and silver. So I'm always surprised at how little understanding there is between the state circuit of money and the private circuit of money. So the next slide takes us to the dilemma for modern theories of modern money. Is modern money, or is it and should it be, the state who does create or should create the modern money supply, or should the market be enabled to create or command the modern money supply? And this comes down to, really, should development embrace the market and a debt-based money supply, such as put forward under neoliberalism through the IMF restructuring models, or should we aim in development to bypass the market and increase public democratic power over the money system? Now, obviously, I say yes to that it should be that if you've got a choice between debt or democracy, then it's more beneficial to think about democracy. So as I come back to, in my next slide, I come back to my model that I've used several times here. We reject economic domination. I can't think any development process would want to encourage economic domination and raw private power. I would think that most development models would want to have a rational approach to the use of the power of money and the organising principle of money. I've mentioned the limitations of market forces. There are positive and negatives about market forces. Market forces are okay for what they can produce in society, but if they become the dominant ideological force, as in neoliberalism, I think they become they start to build huge structures of inequality and go against the promises that markets can bring all things to everybody, which is what they legitimize themselves on. Sovereign taxation, of course, is the oldest form of money and continued form of money. It isn't the same as money from the market. It has its own dynamic, but the two interact. And the one that I'm aiming towards is economic democracy. So I want to come on to that. In summary, I'd say in my next slide, the next slide, we're told we can. I'm summarising my fact that unlike people who say, I don't know if they say in the Pakistan situation, there's no magic money trees, but we often get told in Western economies, and Britain is very much keeps talking about magic. There's no magic money trees. We've got to work hard for our money. No magic money trees. Money is in short supply. There's only so much to go around. Any money the public spends is lost to the market sector, etc. This is all nonsense. Modern money is not in short supply. There's no shortage of paper. There's no shortage of metal to make coins. There's no shortage of computer bleeps to make. There's no shortage of numbers to put into bank accounts. It isn't gold and silver. There's as much money as we choose to have. New money is constantly created by banks when they lend and states when they spend. Now, both are open to abuse. To say money is not in short supply isn't to say that money is infinite. They're not the same thing. There is, in a rational money system, there is as much money as you need to meet the goods and services that your people need. It isn't the money that determines how much we can do. It's how much we want to do that determines how much money we need. And therefore, the model's got to be, next slide, please. The model has got to be the democratization of money. What we need to do is to think of money as a democratic resource, a public resource, not just a market phenomenon. But now part of that is to reject the modern theories of money and markets and reclaim the history of the sovereign power to create money. That is state power that is most aligned with money organization, money systems, long before markets became dominant. But to say that the history of the money system, particularly coinage, there are many money systems through the history of human societies, but the one that's come to dominate us is coinage, which then paper money and then computer money and so on. By arguing that money doesn't just come from the market, money comes equally as much from the state, from the public power. That's not the same as democracy. Money has been administered by state powers through history, and the majority of them until very modern times were not at all democratic. Therefore, the fact that sovereign money exists, that the states through history have controlled money systems, particularly coinage systems and particularly precious metal systems, that sovereign money, the power for the sovereign to create money, must become public money. That is, it must be democratized. And the heart of this, I see, is public budgeting. That is, the public should not be saying, how much money have we got? What can we do with it? The public should be saying, what is the needs of our people? And how can we draw up a money system that enables those to be met, the needs of the people to be met to a decent standard? Therefore, and to get to that point, to democratize that, I mean, all states make budgets. We're very used to state budgeting. But the idea that budget is something which is the most important thing a state can do. Most important thing a state can do is make a budget, because that decides its priorities, it decides its values, its motivations, its aims. And therefore, that is where democracy should be. Democracy shouldn't be just about voting people into your government system. I mean, not to stop doing that. but where the population should have maximum political involvement should be drawing up budgets, because this is the heart of modern democracy. Therefore, the model I would put forward as the most important aspect of any kind of economic development, I want to stress this very importantly for economic development, should be based upon a move towards participatory budgeting and monitoring and evaluation of public expenditure. The public expenditure must be at the democratic involvement in public budgeting should be the heart of modern democracy. So I show this in the next diagram. This is how I see participatory budgeting working. Obviously, a government has to make a budget. It can't just devolve all decisions to a local citizens' assembly or whatever model of participation you want. But the way I would see it is the government's task is to make budget proposals. This is a double arrow going to the left there with public participation. That is, the government budget should make its proposals, but should make its proposals in dialogue with the public participation. That is, it should, at all levels, the public should feed into what they see as their needs, and their need and the hierarchy of those needs, the priorities. So the state, with maximum public participation, draws up a budget. Now, then becomes the question of, well, if the state, and this is new money, this is the state, by allocating a budget heading, the state is creating money in the same way as when a bank sets up a mortgage account for somebody to buy a house, they are creating new money. So any budget the government sets is new money. But obviously, money doesn't come without its implications, which I'll deal with a bit later. Therefore, when the government has drawn up its budget proposals in dialogue with its population, it should then take that budget to the central bank to try and assess the monetary impact that budget will have on the market. Because obviously a lot of the public expenditure will flood into the market as the public sector, people in the public sector spend their money in the market sector. So the task of the central bank is to try and assess how that level of public expenditure will impact upon the existing market system. Will it flood it? Will it finance it? It needs to make an assessment. And the assessment really is on what level of retrieval the government should have to retrieve how much of that money from the market, or from the circulation, both in the public and private sectors. How much money should that get? The government is putting through a budget a certain amount of money into circulation. How much money does it need to take out of circulation to match or to stop that money having a great impact on the market sector? So the central bank makes that assessment of the monetary impact on the market system of that level of public expenditure. This then is fed back to the government so that it can make its proposals upon tax. But that is another point about which democracy comes back in, because the government shouldn't just set its tax or wherever it wants. It should open up a public dialogue with its population about, well, we've got to get such a sum of money back in taxation. Who should we tax? How should we tax? What are the principles of taxation? So that should be fed back. That's a two-way dialogue between the government and the people. So that is my model of participatory budgeting. Government drawing up a budget with maximum public participation, having a technical assessment of the monetary impact of that level of spending. Therefore, a universal sum, a total sum of how much money needs to be retrieved, and public participation, how that should be done. If you move to the next slide. The most immediate thing that will come immediately is probably going through all your minds now. Well, won't that public money the money creation cause inflation? Well, the first point I want to make is that by re-theorizing and recognizing the public circuit of money doesn't alter the present system. It doesn't of itself increase the amount of money in the system, because it's merely re-theorizing, rejecting the neoliberal market domination approach and putting in a much more balanced view of how the current money system operates. It needs to be recognized that it's not just public expenditure that can be inflationary. Bank expenditure builds booms and slumps constantly and is seen as being an integral part of it. That in fact it does go in booms and slumps, and that the asset values, which aren't seen often as inflationary. The consumer price is seen as being a big guide to inflation, but the fact that the rich sit on massive asset value increases in their shares or in their paintings or in their houses isn't seen as a problem. So my view of the public nature of money doesn't alter the current money system, but it opens up to challenge the bank money system has as many, and if not more, problems than the public money system. Now, the important thing about the model I've put forward of participatory budgeting is that taxation is seen as both monetary and fiscal. That is, that I don't separate the monetary question from the fiscal question. The fiscal question is about models of tax and spendings, priorities, and the money is the money that is created or not by that level of spending. And this is because the relevant balance is not the one that the neoliberals insist on, that the government must balance its budgets between taxing and spending, that is its fiscal balance. The balance I'm pointing to that needs to be monitored by the central bank is between the state and the market. So that the fiscal system is absolutely integral to the monetary system, and the monetary system is integral to the fiscal system. There isn't the difference that is always stipulated. But this raises another question on the next slide. Is the critical role of the central bank. The central bank is at the heart of the ambiguity about the money systems. The money system circulating through the banking sector and the money system circulating through the state. And the central bank is the ultimate legitimator. It doesn't actually supply any money at all. It just legitimates the system and adds numbers here and there. Whether it adds the numbers to the banking sector or adds numbers to the state sector, it's still just adding numbers. And this nonsense, this neoliberal nonsense of the independence of central banks, that somehow they're being neutral as between the state and the market, is to me an absolute nonsense. It's just a way of harnessing by the banking system, of harnessing the central banks to the banking sector and away from the state. And a part of this, and central to this, is we must clarify the status and challenge the idea that the state has to borrow the money from the market sector to cover any deficit. Why is it borrowing when it can create money in its own right? That can only be market ideology. And certainly it shouldn't be borrowing from the central bank. Central bank is an agent of the public economy. It is the focus of the public, giving legitimation and authenticity to an authority. It is just an acknowledged authority, and who eventually backs the banking system, etc., are the people, the population as a whole, private and public. So the state should in no way be seen as borrowing from the central bank. And in fact, borrowing from the market just creates a safe harbor for the money of the wealthy, when really they should be returning it in taxation. Therefore, as I see it, an acknowledgement of the public money, and that money is a public resource and a public issue, is that the central bank should be administrating the money system as a public resource for publicly determined purposes. Can I have the next slide, please? So in summary, I see that there is a choice here in the development process between debt or democracy. I think it's very important to reclaim and democratize the sovereign power to create money free of debt. I don't see the public as necessarily, as I've said before, as necessarily democratic. It can be highly authoritarian, exploitative and corrupt. But money must be seen as a public resource, not a private matter. Therefore, banking should be democratized as a public utility. It is creating and expanding the money supply by preferential treatment of the already wealthy, as opposed to the poor. And therefore, it should be a public utility and able to balance its input to the different sectors of the population. We should democratize public spending through participatory budgeting. And democratizing the money system would enable socially just and sustainable, what I call sufficiency provisioning. Enough for all, not too much for some and too little for others. And provisioning rather than economy, because lots of the provisioning of public of human life goes outside of the market sector. So it's not just the economy. As I say in the next slide, here let's look at the way we can envisage the future, or how this current system operates and the possibilities for the future. We can make a distinction between the monetized part of the economy, which I've already been doing, and the non-monetized. We can make a distinction between the for-profit approach, the market sector, and the not-for-profit, the public approach. So on the top layer, where we've got the activities for profit, we've got the monetized market, which I've spent a good time talking about, but we've got the non-monetized things that still give profit to participants and to dominant groups in that sector. These are the externalities of the ecosystem that's treated as a free gift, or unpaid labor, basically mostly domestic labor, caring activities. These can be, they're not monetized, but they still contribute to the profitability of the monetized sector. Coming down to the bottom part of that diagram, we've got the monetized, not-for-profit public and social economies, the more formal economies, which is one of the sectors that I would be hoping we would move towards, a democratic public and social economy, but also to move to the bottom right hand, where we acknowledge the non-monetized, but not for profit, what's often called the care economy or the intrinsic value of nature. In the next slide, I summarize the benefits of participatory budgeting in terms of that previous diagram. Bringing in the people as citizens into decision making brings in whole people, not just what I've called economic man, that is, who may be a woman, who just operates on market principles, on transactional principles. That we've got to think of the whole person, the whole of their life, not their working life or their pensions or whatever it might be, but the whole person from birth to death. We must bring in the whole economy. These include all the provisioning sectors of nature, the value nature gives to us that we don't acknowledge, or unpaid labor, or the quality of conviviality in communities, support. It hopefully would bring in the whole community, the diversity of groups, not just have single dimensions of hierarchical groupings, that the whole community can be brought together. And that we also can address the whole human life in nature, the embedded and embodiedness of human beings in their physical bodies and in the environment. So the provisioning becomes expressed as a right to livelihood. And this includes a right to livelihood for nature. Therefore, I would hope that a participatory budgeting system would provide an income for nature, to do all the works needed to bring nature into resilience that we've been undermining so much. Next slide. And these are the publications upon which I've based this talk. The book of more recent book has been exploring the limitations of neoliberal approaches to money systems and try to set out this new model of the sovereign power of money that I've been trying to do. The 215 book makes the case for participatory budgeting, the debt instead of debt, that we've abandoned debt as a determining force and go for democratic public money, as I've been talking about here. And 2010, that was my analysis of the 2007-8 financial crash and the way we could use that crash to move from the dominance of finance and its crises to seeing money as a public resource. Thank you.
A very interesting and a very good new approach to money. And certainly, I think we'll have a lot of questions. Please, folks, raise your hands and I'll take you and I'll just ask one question, Professor Mellor, and then I'll take questions from the floor. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying. And yes, it's a good conception that you're saying, let's get away from private money to public money and let public money be the guiding principle along with your democratic budgeting and things. But Professor Mellor, I have a fundamental problem. Yes, we can move to narrow banking and we can move to public finance to create money. But I have a fundamental problem here, which I think pervades economic thinking in general, where we assume that everything that the state does is good. Unfortunately, living where I do and living where I did live, which is the US, I'm not quite sure whether the state is the benign entity that you're looking at. If Trump comes into power, I'm not sure he'll be as benign as your model suggests. And certainly living here or where I've lived in other places like Africa or whatever, as Asimoglu and Robinson say, it's a extractive government that we have here. Or as Mancur also says, it's a predatory government. Now, if in your model, how do you fit that in, the nature of the government? Because certainly one of the problems that we've had in our 70 years of independence to turn over the colonial state from its extractive state to a more benevolent state. And unfortunately, we failed. Every which way we go, we fail. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I think I made it quite clear in what I've said that I see the sovereign economy, the ability of a state to have the authority to tax, and I think I have made that distinction between the gross raw power. You can have states that bully and have raw power and corruption. I made that point. So in my top right-hand box, I've got states that have sufficient legitimacy and authority. So they are functioning states, as it were. Now, I don't make any assumption those states are benign. That's why I make the point that the sovereign economy isn't the same as the public economy, isn't the same as the democratic economy. But we can't harness the market for good because we depend on the philanthropy of the market. And we know that, as we've seen in these crises, that the rich are just accumulating wealth hand over fist. I mean, there are philanthropists, obviously, but it's not in the same way as states aren't necessarily democratic and caring, markets aren't necessarily philanthropic. They allow people to make private choices about whether to be beneficial to others. So, in saying that there is a sovereign economy, doesn't mean to say that I see that as benign in any way. That's why it has to be. There's a limit to how much you can democratize the market, because by definition it's private decision making. So what we've got to go at is public decision making and democratizing that, because that is the way we can have in. So I'm by no means make benign assumptions about the state. not at all. That's why I argue for economic democracy.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me go to the floor. Naseem Beg, sir. Naseem Beg.
Yes, Professor, thank you very much for the talk. I have read the two of your more recent books. Two or three, I would say, if you could elaborate, please. One, the universal basic income, especially for a country like Pakistan, where there are a lot of people excluded from the economic benefits, and including women. That's one point. The other point that you make in your book, and if you could elaborate on that, is the banking system, when it creates money, it takes money back, including interest. Therefore, it would shrink money supply and stagnate the economy. Therefore, it needs to keep borrowing or lending more, and we have this consumerism and denuding of the earth. So just those 2 points, if you'd like to elaborate a bit on.
Yes, I certainly think if you've got a problem of imbalance of access to money in an economy, there is the case for giving some kind of immediate income. Give money. I quote the book about give money to the people, and I think the best way to end financial exclusion to the poorest is just to give them the money so they can participate. But I'm not sure that the universal basic income is really the most useful way of doing it. I prefer the idea of universal basic services. You make sure that everybody has available the service they need: clean water, housing, etc., and that you set a lower limit. A basic level of income that people should have. So rather than spreading that money universally, I would say make sure that nobody falls under a particular level of income, so that you monetize the poorest so they get an adequate level of income. So that's how I would deal with that. Also, I think it's very important that it's new money. It's no good rolling up other benefits or expenditure on welfare and then folding that all into a basic income. So I think giving people the money, giving people an income, a basic standard of livelihood is the most important thing, rather than the universal income. The question of lending into the economy, I don't know whether your question is alluding to the model, like the Islamic model, where you don't have interest. But
I didn't mean the Islamic concept. What you wrote in your book was that when banks take back money, the money supply will shrink. Therefore, they're forced to keep lending more, yes, and that leads to consumerism, and that leads to all the climate change and all the ills that we see.
Yeah, yes, but that's if you rely entirely for your budget, for your money supply on bank lending. By definition, if people are not borrowing, then the money's not circulating. And if as you got when the financial crisis, that people kept paying off their debts who could pay off their debts, but no new debts were coming out, the money supply shrank dramatically. I think it rose by something coming up to 20% in the build up to the crisis, 2007, and it collapsed by about 20% in the period afterwards. So you have to keep the circuit going, but I assume also it's important to keep the public circuit going as well. I mean, I stand by what I said. I don't. You have to keep lending and to keep the money supply going. If you've got a debt-based or a bank-led money system, perhaps I shouldn't say debt-based, because I think a bank-led money system has the same dynamics whether you pay interest or not.
Thank you.
Meher Zadi.
आर्मी चीफ जो के दो रिप्रेजेंटेटिव हैं
जी, can you hear me?
Ji, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mary Mellor. It was a very enlightening and eye-opening kind of presentation, and I'm really impressed that you are in favor of public interest. And my question to you is, what do you think about these new kind of alternative money, Bitcoin and NFTs? How do they help the socially deprived people, or is it a good form of money to have in the world?
Right. I make a distinction between complementary currencies, local currencies, and the inventions like Bitcoin. Now, to me, they're completely opposite ends of what the aim is. The aim of complementary currencies, local money, local funds, like let schemes and all those things, they're all trying to set up systems to use money to whatever their money form is, to build local economies and to build the social commons. So to me that they're good learning experiences. I think it's more important to democratize the national currency system rather than try to invent a new one. But I think the commitment and the aims of the local currencies, the complementary currency systems, are totally benign, totally useful, and they teach people a lot about money. Now, the cryptocurrencies I see as entirely different. To me, the cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, to me, are just imbued totally with neoliberal values. They're built on the model of gold and silver, the idea of commodity money. They set artificial limits. Bitcoin sets its artificial limit of 21 million. They seek to anonymize and destroy communities, so you can remotely deal with, as a money system, with people who have no social identity at all. They pride themselves that you can't be recognized. And therefore, to me, it's an atomized, neoliberal model of a false, total mythology of what money is, and it's failing anyway, because the ultimate point I make, which I haven't made in my talk, is that I think the ideal money should have no value whatsoever, and should merely be a means of comparing one thing with another. It shouldn't embody absolute values at all. It should be my ideal is the euro note, which just has a number on it. It doesn't mention a bank, it doesn't mention a state, it just mentions a number. I know it's got other faults. I'm not saying this makes it a good system, but as far as its money goes, it's got it down to the absolute minimum, which is just a note with a number on. Whereas Bitcoin and things are setting themselves up as a commodity, and as a commodity, they're going through the roof with a completely Ponzi speculative nonsense. And therefore, the more it sets itself up as a commodity currency, the less useful it is as a currency anyway. So to me, the cryptocurrency is a chronic diversion, and I don't mind using computer systems to circulate the money we've got, but the idea of inventing a whole new cryptocurrency that it exists only as a non-downloadable asset is, to me, is a nonsense. And in fact, I've just been reading somebody who's done a study of a particular cryptocurrency, trying to set up an alternative local currency via cryptocurrency. So trying to meld the two models, and they're getting inundated with people asking what is the price of the currency, and can they make money on it? So it's bringing completely the wrong values. Cryptocurrencies are bringing completely the wrong values to a money system, and therefore they're terribly reactionary.
Mohammed Khurram. Khurram Shabir.
Yes, good evening. I feel honored to be part of this discussion. And I just want to ask Professor Mary that the monetary instruments, like the interest rates are one of the monetary instruments, the short-term interest rate and long-term interest rate. So I want to ask that, can a link be established between these monetary interest rates and the tax avoidance, if we talk about like in an empirical way? And if possible, Professor, could you also refer to me any good paper which would help giving? That's all. Thank you.
I'm sorry, you were breaking up a little bit, and I couldn't.
Okay, I will repeat my question. So my question is, Professor, that the monetary instruments, one of them is the short-term interest rate, and the other one is the long-term interest rate. Like the short-term interest rate is the policy rate, and just my question is, in your opinion, these instruments, do they influence the tax avoidance? The tax avoidance of the corporate sector? And if like these interest rates of the monetary side, if they influence this corporate tax avoidance, if possible, could you give me any empirical evidence if there is? So I hope you got my question.
Yeah, I have. I don't have expertise in what you're asking, and I don't have any empirical evidence about that. All I know is, and this I don't think is answering your question, because it's really about tax avoidance, which the link between interest rates and tax avoidance, about which I don't have any expertise. But what amazed me is that in the financial crash, when countries were bailing out their banks like mad, and countries like Portugal and Spain and Ireland were showing great collapses, and Greece particularly, that people were piling in to buy the debts off those countries, even though they were in deep straits, because of all the available assets at that point in time. The state was seen as the one that was the safest of all, which shows that in a crisis, which is the most important economy, the public economy or the private economy? And people voted with their feet in the financial crisis, and countries and companies poured their money into states because they saw them as safer. But I don't know where this fits into tax avoidance. As I say, I'm sorry, but I don't have the expertise or the knowledge in that area.
Thank you.
It's okay,
Abbas Masri.
About, hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, I just had a quick question about the idea of participatory budgeting. How does something like that take place in practice? Is it through the electoral cycle where citizens will rank order the various sectors, education, healthcare, infrastructure, and so on? How does that happen, like in actuality? Thank you.
I see not linked to the electoral cycle, because we've got that now really, where people, where governments indicate where their expenditure will be, and people can vote for that party or government or not. That's too blunt an instrument. It's got to be fine filtered really, and I think it's got to be through various forms of citizen assembly, of user and supplier panels, of different forms of local participatory selection. So, for instance, the health service. I think of Britain. The health service, a panel made up of all of stakeholders in the health service, would talk about the the needs of their immediate location, the hospitals that they run. And these should be amalgamated. Communities should have, citizens' assemblies could be drawn by randomly inviting people from the community to come and state their needs and whether they think they're adequately funded. So I think there are lots of models of participatory models, which, as I say, the one that's most useful, I think, is citizen assembly. But this is where I see it breaking down the kind of tribal structures of parties where people identify with different political groups or ethnic groups or whatever, and it would bring across a representation of the local community across the board by randomized selection of people, and as citizens' assemblies do. So I think if people are given the chance to participate in and it becomes known that there is a regular ongoing debates about budgets, then I think people will readily join in and directly participate. I think it should be hearing the authentic voices of people in their communities, in their organizations, in their structures, where they can talk about their funding and whether they need more or need it redirected or they think it's being misappropriated. I think the democracy's got to be that basic, and there are lots and lots of people working on this area. So that's what I would recommend.
Thank you. Nadeem Beg, sir.
Yes. So, Professor, one other question, which is the derivatives market, the futures market, whereby people can put in a small deposit and do a transaction worth a very significant size. Do you see that as temporary money creation, which then causes the boom and bust?
Well, I would completely ban any partial payments or hedging in terms of something you are not directly involved in, like taking a gamble on Greek debt or whatever, as people did in the crisis.
Okay.
And
you answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to make one we haven't mentioned, and that is I would put a time scale on which you have to hold shares. You have to have them for at least a day, a week, a month, or 3 months, or whatever it means to stop the churning of shares. You know, the trading on the margins, I think, has got to be just banned.
Thank you very much, Professor Mellor. It's been a great discussion. I think it's a great new system. We should look into it and talk about it and think about it. The underpinnings of this are profound, and we should obviously study it and look into it. Thank you very much for giving us your time. We'll call on you again to talk about sustainable cities, your other passion, and hopefully learn from you there as well. Thank you again.
Thank you for your interest in my work, and for everybody who's been reading and thinking about my ideas. I'm very encouraged. Thank you. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you. All the best. Good night.
Good night.